Freak shows are banned or at least heavily restricted in many places today. But half a century ago, they were everywhere. From state fairs to dusty carnivals and roadside circuses, sideshow tents pulled in curious crowds. These shows featured real people who were born different, or at least made to look like they were. While some of these so-called freaks made a name and a lot of money, most weren't so lucky. And in this video, we're going to show you the 15 strangest sideshow freaks that actually existed. And trust us, their stories are just as unique as themselves. Let's begin this list with number 15, Fred Walters. Fred wasn't always blue. In his early years, he served as a brave captain in the British Army and looked like any other normal man in uniform. But when doctors gave him silver-based pills to treat a medical issue, his skin started changing. First his fingers, then his entire face, and then everything turned blue. Argyria isn't fast, but it's permanent. The more he took, the deeper the color got. When people started offering money to see him, he leaned into it. Fred took more silver, not to cure anything, but to get bluer. Ringling Brothers gave him a place on the stage, and he became known as the Blue Man. It was the color that sold the tickets, but over time, the silver made him sick. By the time he died in 1923, his internal organs were tinted the same cold hue as his skin. Behind the curtains, he was a husband and father. But in the ring, he was just the man who turned himself into a spectacle. For him, life was not normal or merciful. Number 14, Ralph Kruner. Ralph Albert Kruner from Vermont was known in sideshows as the Elephant Skin Man. He had an unusual condition that affected his knees, feet, hands, and possibly other parts of his body, giving him thickened, deeply wrinkled skin that didn't resemble any diagnosed disorder of the time. No one ever gave a medical name for it. Instead, the myth stuck that while pregnant with Ralph, his mother witnessed a fatal elephant stampede that killed 5 men, and the shock left its mark on her unborn child. It was an old superstition, maternal impression, that a pregnant woman's trauma could alter a fetus. And in Ralph's case, people believed it. He leaned into it, performing at fairs and circuses, turning his condition into a livelihood. There aren't many details about the rest of his life, but he died in 1952. For decades, his image circulated in sideshow postcards, his skin folded like canvas, still prompting more questions than answers. Number 13. Karl Hermann Unthen. Karl was born in East Prussia in 1848 with no arms. At the time, many parents might have hidden or institutionalized a child like him, but Karl's father pushed him to live fully and independently, using only his feet. As a child, Karl learned to dress himself, eat, write, and eventually master complex tasks. He shuffled cards, lit cigarettes, and even taught himself to play the violin. He was eventually invited to perform in Vienna for Johann Strauss himself. Unthen traveled and performed widely, not as a novelty, but as a legitimate musician. He later toured military hospitals during World War I, giving concerts and speaking to amputees to prove life didn't end with limb loss. Unlike many in the sideshow circuit, Karl built financial security, wrote his autobiography, The Armless Fiddler, and died at 80. His life blurred the line between freak show and stage performance. He wasn't just a spectacle, he was proof that talent doesn't need symmetry. Number 12. Mademoiselle Gabrielle. Mademoiselle was born in 1884 in Basel without legs. From early on, she refused to hide. By 1900, she was already performing in the Paris Exposition, billing herself as the living half-lady. Her torso was fully developed, but her body ended just below the waist. Instead of settling into a quiet life, she turned that difference into a spectacle and a business. She moved to America in 1914 and joined Ringling Brothers and later worked at Coney Island, where she became a consistent draw. She wore elegant gowns, posed for photographs, and built a name across the sideshow world. Unlike many of her peers, Gabrielle got rich doing it. She married twice, though both husbands stayed out of the spotlight. Then she vanished from public view, and nothing is confirmed about her later years. Some say she returned to Switzerland. Others think she simply retired. But in her prime, Gabrielle wasn't just part of the show. She was the show. Number 11. Dagmar Rothman. Dagmar Rothman, better known by stage names like the Great Waldo, the Regurgitating Geek, and the Human Ostrich, built an entire career around one bizarre ability: controlled regurgitation. Born in Germany in 1920, he could swallow objects like coins, live frogs, jewelry, and goldfish, and then bring them back up intact, in order, and on cue. He worked with Ripley's Auditorium in New York in the 1940s, where he became a staple in the world of shock performance. Audiences were torn between amazement and nausea, especially when he gulped down live animals. They called him the Human Ostrich because of how indiscriminately he could swallow. Off-stage, Rothman's personal life was less controlled. After a breakup with a woman he loved, he took his own life by inhaling gas in his home. Though his death was quiet, his act left a loud impression. In an era where sideshow stunts were often exaggerated, Waldo's was disturbingly real. He didn't pretend to be anything crazy. He just swallowed it whole. Number 10. The Eye Smoker. Well, now this one is strange. Alfred Langevin was born in Canada around 1885, and no doctor could explain how his body worked. People called him the Eye Smoker. Alfred could stick a cigarette, pipe, or even a balloon nozzle into his eye socket and blow smoke or air out of his mouth. It wasn't magic. It wasn't a trick. His sinus and tear duct system simply allowed airflow in both directions. At one point, he even played a recorder through his eye. He toured all over North America, performing in sideshows and circuses. What began as a shock act became a full routine. He got married in 1909 and kept performing well after. Most people didn't know how to react, half laughing, half recoiling. But for Alfred, it was a job. He wasn't chasing applause, just a check and a crowd. His name faded over time, but anyone who witnessed it never forgot. A man blowing smoke from his eye sounds fake, but Alfred Langevin did it for real. Number 9. The Sapient Porker. Toby wasn't just a pig, he was a performer. In the 1800s, pigs like Toby were trained to read, do basic math, and follow verbal commands in front of stunned audiences. They weren't magical. They were intelligent, observant, and motivated by food. Toby was one of the brightest. Trainer Fred Leslie ran a rotating cast. Since pigs grew fast, their bodies often outpaced their abilities. New recruits learned by watching, and the old stars were moved to nearby farms. But one night, as the familiar music kicked off a show, the retired pigs pushed open a gate, wandered into the tent, and took back their act. They nudged the young ones aside and ran through the routine flawlessly, reclaiming their stage. Audiences roared. It wasn't just funny, it felt loyal. Ricky Jay later wrote about these pigs in Learned Pigs and Fireproof Women, immortalizing acts like Toby's as strange and clever reminders that talent comes from the most unexpected places. Number 8. R.H. Hubbard. He wasn't a magician, but his act demanded belief. Nicknamed the Torture King, he could hammer 8-inch steel spikes into his nose without flinching. No trick tips, no rubber props, just raw body control and pain tolerance that pushed beyond reason. He became a sideshow staple for acts involving self-inflicted agony, skewers through flesh, hooks in the face, you name it. People didn't just stare, they winced. Some thought it was an illusion, but those who stood close knew better. His face didn't bleed because the spikes followed precise anatomical paths behind cartilage, avoiding major vessels. It was part biology, part mastery, and all great. He didn't rely on gore. His timing, pacing, and calm expression made it worse. Too quiet to be fake, too smooth to be a fluke. Hubbard never explained much. The mystery sold tickets, and in a world full of staged pain, his was the real thing. He didn't need fire or swords, just a spike and an audience. Number 7. Arthur Lewes. Arthur Lewes was born with neurofibromatosis, which is a genetic condition that covered his body, especially his face, in heavy folds of tumor-like growths. In 1933, at age 42, he appeared at Ripley's Auditorium in Chicago. Visitors were stunned. His appearance was striking, even unsettling, but Arthur stood there anyway, letting the world look. Back then, there was no treatment, no cure, and almost no understanding of the condition. The sideshow wasn't glamour, but it was visibility, and for people like Lewes, that was everything. He chose to be seen. He lived in public, under lights, instead of in shadows or institutions. He didn't beg for sympathy or sell inspiration. He stood quietly, with a body the world called freakish. But Arthur didn't disappear. He lived to be 97, last reported alive in 1991. Most of his life is undocumented, but that long stretch of survival says enough. He endured stares, silence, and misunderstanding, and kept living far past anyone's expectations. That, in itself, was its own quiet act. Number 6. The Great Zadma. Daniel P. Mannix IV didn't just perform in sideshows, he lived through a dozen different lives. Born in 1911, he toured as the Great Zadma, swallowing swords and breathing fire. But he was also a University of Pennsylvania graduate, a World War II naval officer, a wildlife photographer, and a full-blown author. He wrote more than 20 books, some deeply researched and unflinching: Black Cargoes, The History of Torture, and Those About to Die, the last of which helped inspire Gladiator. He raised wild animals in his Pennsylvania home, once witnessed a cobra fatally bite herpetologist Grace Olive Wiley, and was obsessed with Oz. He didn't just report on circus life, he lived it. His memoir, Step Right Up, remains unmatched in honesty about that world. He didn't romanticize the sideshow. He recorded it, lived inside it, and moved on to the next strange thing. Mannix wasn't just another act. He was a man with a brain. Number 5. Black Diamond. By the late 1920s, Black Diamond had already killed 3 people, but the Algae Barn Circus still paraded him down Main Street in Corsicana, Texas. He was massive, chained between 2 females, tusks filed down, and his trunk restrained with iron. It wasn't enough. During that parade, he snapped again. He flung his trainer, Curly Prickett, and trampled a woman named Eva Speed Donahue in front of a crowd. Horses scattered, people screamed, cars bolted. That was his last day. Executing a 5-ton elephant wasn't simple. They moved him near Kennedy, outside San Antonio, and formed a firing squad. Reports say it took more than 170 bullets to bring him down. Like Topsy, like Mary, Black Diamond died not in peace, but in front of people who once paid to watch him. There was no ceremony, no apology. He was a beast made to perform until he couldn't. When the curtain fell, it came with gunfire, and the circus kept rolling. Number 4. Ernie Defort. Ernie was born with a parasitic twin attached to his chest. The twin, named Len, had partial limbs and a face, giving the impression of 2 boys growing from one body. They shared a blood supply, but Len was non-functional. Sideshow promoters gave Ernie titles like the Two-Headed Boy or Ernie Len, turning his condition into a living exhibit. He appeared at carnivals, attracting crowds torn between amazement and discomfort. His body made headlines, but it was his surgery that made history. At age 12, doctors took the extraordinary step of removing Len in what was then a high-risk procedure. Ernie survived. After that, he slipped from public view. Some say he married later, lived a quiet life, and chose privacy over publicity. His story, though short in the spotlight, remained one of the most well-documented cases of parasitic twins in the U.S. Not because of the shock, but because, for once, he got to outgrow the label. Number 3. Murderous Mary. Mary was a 5-ton Asian elephant with Sparks' world-famous circus. In 1916, her name became infamous after a tragic parade stop in Kingsport, Tennessee. Red Eldridge, a drifter hired the day before, struck her near the ear with a hook as she reached for a watermelon. Witnesses said she flung him with her trunk, then crushed his head. Panic spread. Papers called for justice. The next day, Mary was transported to Irwin, Tennessee. There, in front of 2,500 spectators, she was hanged by an industrial crane. On the first attempt, the chain snapped. Mary collapsed, injured. The second time, it worked. A photo was taken, an elephant suspended in midair. It still circulates online, often dismissed as fake. But it happened. Mary wasn't tired. She wasn't spared. She was made into a public warning. Her execution had nothing to do with justice. It was about vengeance, spectacle, and public pressure. And just like the crowd that day, history still hasn't completely turned away. All right, guys, now let's move to number 2, Catherine Virginia McDonald. Catherine was born in 1910. At first, she seemed perfectly healthy, but lodged deep inside her chest was something no one expected. An underdeveloped parasitic twin. Doctors could feel it through her ribs. X-rays showed malformed bones, soft tissue, and partial limbs that grew inward instead of out. There was no surgery for that in 1910. She remained small, lived gently, and was doted on by parents who chose compassion over shame. But her body was fragile. Just after her 5th birthday, she developed a fever and struggled to breathe. It was tonsillitis, complicated by bronchitis, and she died on December 29, 1915. She never joined a sideshow, never stood beneath circus lights. But her case became one of the earliest parasitic twin records in North American medical journals. She didn't live long, but she was known. In an era that often hid people like her, Catherine's name and condition became part of history instead of a footnote. Number 1. Dandy George and Rosie. Dandy George, probably born Albert George Spink, was a vaudeville acrobat who made his name with a performing terrier named Rosie. In the 1890s, George toured with his brother as Spink and Spink, a duo act. When that ended, he brought Rosie on stage. The dog danced, posed, and eventually became the main draw. By the early 1900s, Rosie had top billing in music halls across England. Their fame grew, but things behind the curtain weren't so rosy. In 1919, George was charged with cruelty involving another dog named Andy. That charge suggested Rosie's cheerful stage life may have masked something darker. A short film made in 1927 titled Dandy George, and Rosie preserved the act, though the Rosie in it was likely a replacement. George's name faded as vaudeville died out, but he belonged to a strange chapter where animals weren't just companions, they were co-stars. And Rosie? Whether original or not, she danced her way into showbiz history and stole the spotlight. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for hanging with us, and we'll see you soon in the next one.